Welcome back. I hope those of you that are returning have grabbed a bite to eat, maybe something to drink, use the restroom, whatever the case may be. We're happy that you came back to join us for this next session. As I said at the top of the show, that we do have nurses interviewing nurses, so I'm pleased and excited to introduce you to Jennifer Williams, who is our customer success advisor, and she's going to go ahead and lead the next segment. Off to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Dana. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Williams. I'm a customer success advisor at Avasure, and I'm excited to be with you today and share a great customer success story from Providence, Oregon region. Our guest today is Erin Otis Robertson, Managed Nursing RVM in Providence, Oregon region. As a nurse manager for the region RVM program, Erin brings extensive experience as both a charge nurse and a floor nurse, allowing her to possess a comprehensive understanding of the unique challenges and dynamics within the healthcare setting. Her exceptional leadership abilities are evident in her ability to inspire teamwork, foster trust, and promote effective professional communication. By prioritizing staff retention, work quality, and patient safety, Erin is dedicated to driving excellence in healthcare, and she makes a lasting impact on the lives of both her staff and patients. And then along with Erin, we also have Diane Norris joining. Diane Norris is part of the RVM monitoring team and actually recently won an award for Superstar Monitor Staff from Avasure. And she is also dedicated to ensuring that patients remain safe. She was a caregiver with Providence for 26 years before transitioning to the RVM team, and we're glad to have her here today. So welcome, Erin and Diane. Glad to have you here today.
Hi, thank you so much. We're really happy to be here.
Awesome. So Erin, if you could kick us off and just tell us a little bit about your program and the centralized monitoring that you currently have going at the Oregon Hub.
Sure, absolutely. And just for the Oregonians out there, it's Oregon. If you say Oregon, they're gonna lose it. But yeah, so here in Oregon, with Providence, we have 8 hospitals. So they're spread all over our state, and we have a pretty big state. So some of them are about 7 hours apart. So we are here in Portland, but we have hospitals in Seaside out at the coast and way down in Southern Oregon at Medford and out in Hood River and all between. So we have grown. We're now at 67 cameras that are spread between all of those hospitals. We call them ministries. So if I say ministries, that's what I'm referring to, the different hospitals. We currently run a staff of 6 day and night here in the Oregon Hub. So we have one lead who kind of coordinates admissions and discharges and helps all the staff get to all their breaks, dealing with complicated patients, sort of troubleshooting things, helping maintain professional communication, make sure everyone's clear on what happens, dealing with staffing. And then 5 techs who are monitoring the patients, and they generally watch somewhere between 8 and 10, but can flex up as the need arises. So it's fun and challenging to have. We have a really diverse staff, which is wonderful. It comes with its own, unique challenges, as I'm sure people know when you're sitting close together with people. Usually in healthcare, you're used to being maybe one-on-one with a patient, and then you move on and you're one-on-one with a staff member, but you're not generally just continuously in this group with the same staff for 12 hours. And that has its own challenges. And so much of what we do is communication. So we've been talking a lot about that recently, like how do we create common language? How do we make sure that the nurses understand what we're saying, that the patients understand what we're saying, that we understand what each other is saying, and that we're all keeping our patients safe and working to promote that. So as I said, we're at 67 cameras. We're in the process of trying to increase our utilization, find new ways to use the Avasure software, to use this technology to keep patients safe, so that our utilization goes up and we can get all the way to 100 cameras, which is our goal. I've been in this role for almost 1 year as the manager of the regional solicitor department. prior to that, I was the assistant nurse manager here. And as was introduced, I was a charge nurse on a respiratory cardiology step-down unit prior to that, and then a staff nurse on the floor. So it is really helpful to have that knowledge of using the technology on the inpatient side and then coming here and understanding, being able to help bridge that gap. Because sometimes when we're here, I'll have staff who have never worked in an inpatient environment. Maybe they've only been in long-term care, and they don't understand, why isn't the nurse coming faster? And I'll be like, maybe they're in an hour-long wound dressing. Maybe they're in a code. Like, we don't know what else happening. So it's helpful to, on both sides, to help navigate that conversation in both directions and help bridge the understanding for the floor staff of what we're experiencing and for our staff of what the floor staff might be experiencing. So that was my intro. If there are questions, I'm happy to go on to the next.
Awesome. Thank you for that information. I love that you touched on communication already, because we know that that's a really positive component of any program, is having good communication. It kind of drives the understanding and trust between monitor staff and the hub. So that's a great point to bring up. And I agree with you that having that aspect of working out on the floor and understanding the workflows and processes that you typically see from day to day is very helpful when you're managing a hub, so that you can understand what's going on at the site level as well. So I appreciate that answer. Can you tell me a little bit about Providence and why they chose to go with a centralized hub and spoke model? I know there's multiple hub settings across Providence, but why in particular did they choose to go with centralized monitoring? What were their goals associated with that? And how did that kind of come about?
Yeah, absolutely. And that decision predated me being in this role. We went live in December of 2018, and that was just beginning at one of our large hospitals with the idea of doing the spoke model. So Providence in Oregon has two large, like 450 bed hospitals, and then the other roughly 150 beds are in the other 6 hospitals. So potentially there was the option to do on-site model for those 2 large hospitals. But for the smaller hospitals, with utilization being unknown and maybe they only need 1, 2, 3 cameras, staffing that is not a massive savings if you're doing it on site, right? If I'm at a hospital with 24 beds, they're not going to need remote visual monitoring every minute. So if I'm watching one person there, that's the same as using a constant observer. And that's the data that we often look at, that I'm looking at to compare a need. So I'll refer to this probably again, but I look a lot at each hospital's utilization. How much are they using us? And then how many sitters are they using, to give an idea of potential that we could be assisting in that need. I know not every constant observer can also be an RVM candidate, but some of them can be. So it's a good way to get a judge for, where that need is. So I think that kind of thought, specifically looking at sitter data, at constant observer data, was one of the things that Oregon used to decide we need to have this all centralized so that we can have one tech in Portland who's watching 2 people in Medford, 1 person in Hood River, 2 people in Newburgh, and 3 people in Portland. And that way, it's much more efficient, just based on our physical location and the sizes of all those dispersed hospitals.
That's good to hear. And you already answered a little bit of the end of that question, was what metrics are you looking at to kind of measure the success of your program? It sounds like there's a large focus on that cost savings for sitter reduction. Do you guys look at other types of safety metrics as well, like falls or anything additional for your program?
So currently we haven't been measuring that. I am part of the regional fall committee, and we do meet and discuss, what learnings do we have. We have just recently in we call it the Patient Logistics Center, that has several different departments within it that are all about solving these kind of complicated problems throughput and staffing and that kind of thing. So we have a new assistant nurse manager whose purview is quality. So these metrics that we've been wanting to capture, that's going to be part of her job, is looking at, what falls have we reduced, what adverse events have we reduced, and how can we quantify some of these savings that we know we're doing. We can see the numbers, but how do we put it all in a package that shows, this hospital had this many falls, their utilization with RVM was this, and now their falls are this. That's what it's in process, but not done. I'd love to show you a graph, but hopefully next time.
That's okay. Do you guys know approximately a percentage of approximately how much you reduced your sitters or your sitter costs over time?
So it's varied so much. I mean, as everyone knows, we're talking about COVID, and I know that is kind of a ridiculous time frame to talk about, but it was such a different environment that we're not really comparing apples to apples when we talk about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, right? And now we're facing still, I think, the end of COVID being such a big influence. So we're getting, I think, just now, just this summer and spring, getting into more of a normal where the fall is busier with flu and COVID, winter's busier, spring people are pretending they're not sick and they don't come into the hospital as much, and our census drops. So the sitter hours drop, right? And seeing more of a regular continuity. So I'm tracking those, but looking at the data from 1, 2, 3 years ago, I don't think we can compare that reasonably.
Okay. So doing a centralized model is a huge undertaking. Can you tell us a little bit about how you prioritized what you needed to do in order to create your centralized model, who you included in that, who were your main stakeholders, and some of the nuances of putting that together?
Sure. So when we began, I was not the manager, and I'm close with the previous manager, who was also not the manager at that time. So talking with her, she said that the pro forma was already done, and there were high-level executives who in the region who were interested in how do we address all these sitter needs, right? We have all of these one-to-ones that are costly. They're incredibly costly, and the data doesn't necessarily show, looking at Avasure, looking at remote visual monitoring, that it's preventing any more adverse events than doing a remote modeling. So that they had already worked through that when we began. But looking, one of the big, I'm thinking key stakeholders, she was saying there weren't any key stakeholders who were opposed to this happening. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Thinking about Avasure, thinking about this technology, anytime any of us have heard of it or shared it, I mean, I think the same light bulb goes off, like, that's such a good idea. Those people that you walk in and you say 1,000 times a day, you remember being at the bedside, you'd go 1,000 times and be like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. That's us. You don't have to have somebody walk in there 1,000 times.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So there were, the CNOs from each hospital were involved in that and talking about their sitter hours and using that as the way that they broke out, how do we deal with compensation for this program? How do we fund this program? Because it is 8 hospitals that all have their own financial organization. How do we get them to work together to something that's going to serve everyone? So that's where the justification for the service came from, is pulling on those sitter hours.
Okay, great. That's a good point. And I like that you talked about having executive leadership at each site involved, having the CNOs involved in the initial process, and then hopefully having them kind of be that main contact, main lead person at each site to ensure that the program is running smoothly. So all great points, and I appreciate you sharing that. Can we talk a little bit about creating workflows and processes, getting buy-in initially with the program? You're having someone from another site monitor other sites' patients. How did you guys go about getting that initial buy-in, and what went into identifying those processes and workflows, and how did you go about that, and how do you implement new and improved processes and workflows as you move along?
You got it. That was a lot of points, so I'm putting them all in my head, and grab me if I don't get to every single one and remind me to get back to them, because I don't want to leave any parts out. But I know that for me still going forward, and initially, a lot of that was going on site, right? It's going to, and that's still what I do, it's going to the hospitals. Like, we just rolled out cameras in one of our emergency departments that are dedicated to them. And I spent the whole day, I went to the 7 a.m. huddle, the 10 a.m. huddle, the noon huddle, the 2 p.m. huddle, the 7 p.m. huddle, and went through with staff every time. This is what we do. This is how it works. Look at me, I'm this person you can trust. So I think that was what was happening initially, that my predecessor was going to all of these different hospitals and being there with them, being with executive leadership, being with the nurses at the bedside and saying, what questions do you have? You know, you've had this, they were given through our regional education department, they were given an online learning module. And then she's there to say, hey, did that make sense? You know some of these people. Remember Tammy, you used to work with her. She works for me now. She's going to be the one on the phone who calls you. Like, really humanizing it and making it something where staff feel like, oh, I know Tammy, or oh, I met her. She seemed reasonable. I want her to help me out. Yeah. And not feeling like, I know it's easy when something is coming from afar, from someone you don't know, and it's just coming to you as an email or a policy. It's easy to feel like they are making us do something. They are wanting to change it. And really being in person is the thing that drives it. It makes it feel okay. So as far as processes for then and now, I think Providence is good at setting a culture of, I want to improve. So if something's not working for you, please tell me, because that's how I get better. And that's what we talk about with our department. Like, if it's not, the nurses have a problem, find out what it is. Let's fix it. Let's make it better. And that's what really drives our process improvements, that we're just trying to think of a specific example, like with these ED cameras that we're rolling devices to the emergency department. And in an inpatient environment, we watch for elopement, we watch for patients with self-harm. There's a whole host of things that we'll watch for, but the emergency department is such a different setting that to start with, we're only watching for lines and tubes or falls, things that are really straightforward and don't have a whole bunch of behavioral health legal ramifications. So I'm working with behavioral health, I'm working with the ED managers and the regional ED educator to say, what can we do? What will still be safe for our staff to be watching in these higher intensity settings? Like, what can we do there? So that drives the way that we change our workflows and our policies.
Okay.
Did that answer some of that, Jennifer?
It answered just about all of it. So great job keeping track of that. I know that was a loaded question. So what I'm hearing you say is a couple points I took out of that is culture management, just making sure you're creating a culture of continuous process improvement, and personalizing the hub, making sure that that communication is open, people understand what goes on at the hub, who's at the hub, and it's their own colleagues that are monitoring the patients. And then just monitoring the need for those changes to happen when they occur and being open to that, and including leadership and all levels of the program at the different sites to make sure everybody's on the same page and understands what's going on, when something is going to happen, so that they're feeling comfortable with the change before it actually occurs. So those are all great points to share. Can you tell me a little bit about budgeting and financing for centralized monitoring? How does that work at Providence? You touched on this a little bit earlier, that each site has their own budget. So how does that work? How are you guys capturing the budget and implementing it into the program?
Yeah, and that's honestly, that's just what I'm facing for the first time this year. The budget for this previous year was done when I came into this role. So just looking at that now, and I hope it's specific enough for you, but it does draw from the number of beds in that hospital and the number of sitter hours. So there's a great incentive for leadership in each of those hospitals to be telling their staff, like, when you're sitting, you better be clocking in as a sitter, because that justifies, you know, what goes to that budget to help them. So it's just a percentage of that.
Awesome. So this next question is for Diane. How do you
Yeah.
integrate your virtual safety attendants with your bedside staff to make sure that they're viewed as a critical part of the care team?
Well, let's see. Each day we do we check in with each nurse and go over our notes that we have for the patient and make sure they're current. And yeah, I mean, probably the biggest thing. And just finding out if there's any other information that we need to know, because from admission something could have changed. And yeah.
So do you find, Diane, that you are spending a lot of time communicating with the site level staff as well, and kind of trying to be proactive and bring them into communication as needed?
Oh yeah, for sure. And also giving, maybe suggesting a second intervention like mitts or posy, restraints or something that can also keep them on camera, but help them and us be able to keep the patient safe and say efficient, but really efficient in everybody's time.
Yeah, I like that. I
Not
like
just
that
one.
thought that with your background in being a caregiver previously, obviously you have some insights into how to keep patients safe while you're working on the floor, right? So you
Right.
try to incorporate that into your everyday as with your virtual care as well, and make those suggestions as needed when you think it'll help the patient.
I'll have to say that I think a big thing about this, being able to, click into a room and hear maybe a patient who might be yelling, and the staff has no idea that they're yelling and they've forgotten how to use their call light, and we can ask them what they need, and just being able to, interact with the patient when the nurse doesn't even know that the patient needs help because they,
Absolutely. So, Diane, can you also tell us a little bit about the award that you won through Avasure? And, what are some of the aspects of your job that you felt like made you eligible for that nomination? And how did you feel receiving that award?
Well, if I'm going to be honest with you, I really think it's a team effort. We work as a team here. Everybody supports each other. We communicate really well with each other. Not to say that there's not issues every now and then, but we really communicate well and everybody supports each other. So I felt kind of funny getting the award as, I'm the best, whatever, but because it's just like, I don't know, I'm just doing my job. I don't know. I care about the patients and their safety, and I enjoy it. And I know that some days that, we have patients that might be in the hospital for a month, and the only interaction might be us over the camera. And it's just, it's a huge deal. It's a good job. I think it's a good thing.
Well, that's very commendable, but Diane, and I think that it's important for those that monitor patients virtually, like the job, and really enjoy the job and know how to engage the patient appropriately. And it sounds like that's one of the things that you love to do, is continually engage the patient and make sure that they feel like they're being cared for. So I really appreciate that information on your award, and congratulations to you for receiving that. Back to Erin, can we talk a little bit about staffing the hub? Where is the hub actually located? Is it a separate hub, or is it a hub within a hospital within your system? And how do you guys manage hiring, retention, and keeping the hub staffed to the potential that it has?
Yeah, you bet. Again, draw me back, Jennifer, if I miss anything. But we staff right now 6 staff members at a time, like I said. So there's 1 lead and then 5 staff members who are watching patients. The next time that we grow, just based on how many breaks we have to take, we're going to have a second lead and another station. So that, otherwise there's just not time in the day for everyone to take breaks. That second lead will do more of supporting staff and making sure that they're reading the Friday updates that I send out, that they're making sure everyone's getting to their health streams, helping people troubleshoot things, working on some of those other supplementary aspects that a lot of times the primary lead doesn't have the bandwidth to help with because it's just so tight when you get this hole in the schedule. So thinking about hiring, I specifically look for people who have healthcare experience. I think having a basic knowledge of like, which is more dangerous for someone to be pulling on, a central line or an IV. If you've never been in healthcare, you really don't know. You don't know. And that's really helpful. Like, are they pulling at a trach? Are they pulling at like a dressing? Just to have some idea, like, do I need to call the nurse or do I need to stat and call the nurse? What's happening right now? Or can I just remind the patient, don't touch that? So there is some common knowledge that comes with having a little healthcare experience. I look for that. But I would say the biggest thing that I look for in someone that I want to hire is the ability to communicate clearly and effectively, because you are just a voice with your patient, with the nurse, with the house supervisor, and often with one another, because you're looking at your patients. And so there aren't all those other clues of like, I'm using my arm, so you know I'm joking. Like, you have to be able to say the thing that you mean and have a little conflict about it. Like, I'm hoping this patient can get mitts put on, like Diane was saying, and there's like, I don't want that. How do you have that conversation without taking offense? That, you know, it's easy to assume the bedside nurse doesn't think you know what you're talking about. So how do you navigate that? I'm really trying to find people who communicate well. It's probably the most important thing that I look for.
So
go ahead.
So what I've heard you say about staffing is that you look for individuals that have at least some health experience, some health care background, individuals that can communicate very well and have good communication skills, and then obviously a little bit of tech skills, right? Because they're working with software and a computer and virtually. So those are all great components of monitor staff, and it sounds like you hit on those. We are coming a little close to 10 minutes in, so I do want to get to some questions from the audience, but I did want to ask one more question of you, Erin. Can you talk a little bit maybe about some of the challenges that you've had throughout your time as a hub and lessons learned? And then on the opposite side, if you or Diane have any great catches that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah. I feel like our biggest projects are, you know, staff retention and satisfaction with the job, which to me is both of those are about feeling engaged in your work and feeling that you are appreciated and that you are recognized for what you're doing and you have the tools to do what you want. So we do a lot of, is it okay if I share for a second? I can show you some of, I'm just gonna do it.
Sure.
I do a lot of posting our goals. Like, these are our avoidable harm events that we're trying to minimize each month. Here's our goal so that everyone can see where we are, and then we can troubleshoot, you know, what else might we be doing? And then I'm also really forthcoming about, we have 2 polls that we do every month of how supported do you feel by your fellow caregivers, and how recognized for your contribution, how much do you feel that I am recognizing you? Does that make sense?
Yes, that's absolutely, yes. So that's great that you include them in that and ask them how they're feeling about the process and making sure that they're feeling comfortable in their positions and jobs. So that's great. Is there any great catches that you would like to share with us?
Yeah,
Well, I mean, yeah, we had a lot, really. Like with, we do get like CWA patients, drug withdrawal patients. Some techs have caught actually patient having drugs from somebody who brought, family friend had brought in drugs.
We had a tech catch a patient who was quite different from the day before, just a couple of weeks ago. She was telling the nurse the patient had moved floors. So yesterday they were like this on this other floor, very busy. Now it's today, they're on a new floor. So the staff didn't see them before. And she called in and was like, something's wrong. Something's seriously wrong. She's way more out of it. And she had a stroke. So they rapid response her and got her all, did a whole stroke protocol, and amazing catch. Yeah. It was subtle. She was just more out of it.
Yeah, we have a lot of that where as we do our update with our nurses, I'll say, I had this patient yesterday and this is how she was or he was, and they'll be like, oh, that's great because I don't know this patient at all. So, it's
Yeah, I think the best great catches are when it's something that's unexpected, right? It's not like your typical fall. It's not something that you're expecting. It's understanding patient behavior like we've never understood it before, because we're looking at them in a 24/7 window instead of just intermittently when we go in and out of the room. So I think those are the best great catches, when you're just seeing some sort of change or behavior change in the patient and you let the staff know and it turns out to be something that needs to be taken care of immediately or is a health issue. So those are the best great catches. So I'm going to go to some questions from the audience because we only have about 5 minutes left. Who were your key cross-functional partners that helped you build your business case for centralized monitoring, and how did you work with them?
Yeah, so for me, initially, as I was saying, we worked a lot with our IT department. We have some really strong people there. I still do. Working with our executive leadership for financing, talking to legal, working with them about how do we make this happen, working with the different department managers to really get them to understand and support what was going to happen and to roll out education on the other side. And those were the main people. And those are still the people that I usually rely upon. I talk to IT, I talk to, as we're needing to make changes or improvements or grow, creating a business case, and then I bring things to our, I'm trying to think of what the acronym is, but it doesn't matter. It's an executive collaborative team of physicians and executives that, okay, what needs to happen next? So I bring data to them and say, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to hire 10 more people. I want to be able to watch 15 more patients every single day. Here's why, here's the money.
Okay.
And yeah.
Great. I have another question from an organization that says they're looking to expand. What types of patients are you monitoring? I know you talked a little bit about ER. Do you monitor in the ICU or any other types of non-med surgical areas in your program?
Sure, we monitor in the ICU, help me if I neuro. Yeah, we do a couple of specialty programs in neuro where we watch patients who are being taken off of their seizure medications and being put on EEG, and they're wanting to prompt a seizure so they can find the locality to see if they're surgical candidates. There are also some patients with a similar thing where they're actually implanting something in their brains, and we watch them to anything that's unusual. We alert the nurse, which Diane had a great catch on one of those and got the nurse to the bedside as the patient's having a seizure. So we do that. We're working on developing more pediatrics. There's not a reason that we can't be watching peds, but it's just something that there's been more hesitancy about because parents are often there, but how do we help protect those kids? Eating disorders, you're right, patients. Yeah, there's quite a lot of that. But working on expanding our emergency department support as well, because there's so much need for patients who are low risk, who are on a hold, and patients who are at risk for self-harm, but maybe they're not actively suicidal, they're just below that. So trying to make sure we develop real safe protocols before we just start doing it. So
nice. So it sounds like you're really open to continually expanding your program, and when an idea comes forth from, say, a site or an individual that feels like there's a patient that could potentially benefit from the program, that you guys are pretty open to looking at different areas that you've never monitored in before, looking at those smaller populations of patients that you might have in your hospitals that could potentially benefit from the devices. So I feel like that's a great way to run a centralized program is understanding your patients, understanding the needs of your patients, and making sure that everybody that possibly can benefit will benefit
Yeah.
from the program.
We've actually watched staff who are at risk of being hurt by the patient before. We watched the constant observer before to make sure they're not being hurt. So yeah, it is, you're right. It's just having that open line of communication where they say, we need this, and we'll say, let's see if we can make it work.
Great. Well, we're running down on time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I want to thank both of you, Diane and Aaron, for being with us today. We really appreciate you guys sharing your time and sharing your stories with us. It's been wonderful working with you. We hope to do it again. But right now, I'm going to go ahead and hand things back to Dana.
Let's give some applause. I feel so bad that we're not live and we can't applaud all these amazing presenters. It's incredible. It's just so fantastic to have people take time out of their day to share their stories. We know that obviously a lot of folks think that it's just about falls and that's what we're doing to keep patients safe. But I think when you start and think about what Aaron and Diane said from Providence in Oregon, not Oregon, thank you, that they were able to catch, their observers were able to catch a patient experiencing a stroke. How powerful is that when you're starting to talk about starting your program?